I need to get this down, to lay it all out, because even now, months later, the sheer impossibility of it gnaws at me. I'm what you'd call a skeptic, a rationalist. I don't do drugs, rarely drink, and I pride myself on a pretty level head. What I experienced last October deep in the woods of North Carolina wasn't a dream, wasn't a hallucination. It was real, and it haunts me. My buddy, Alex, had inherited a piece of land from a distant uncle he'd barely known. It was way out in the sticks, miles from anything resembling civilization, accessible only by a series of progressively worsening dirt tracks. The uncle had apparently been a bit of a recluse, and the property included an old, dilapidated cabin. Alex, ever the optimist, envisioned it as a rustic getaway project. He'd invited a few of us up for a weekend to help clear some of the overgrown land and maybe do some initial assessments on the cabin. I was mostly going for the bonfire and the chance to escape the city. The drive out was an adventure in itself. The GPS gave up about 5 miles before the supposed turnoff, and Alex was navigating by faded hand-drawn maps the uncle had left. The final stretch was less a road and more a suggestion of a path, barely wide enough for my old truck, with branches scraping aggressively against the paintwork. The air grew colder, the trees denser, pressing in on either side, their canopy so thick that even in the late afternoon, it felt like dusk. "You sure about this, man?" I'd asked Alex, who was riding shotgun, squinting at his map. Yeah, almost there," he said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "The map shows a fork just ahead. We take the left." We bumped and lurched along. The forest here was ancient, primal, towering oaks and hickories, draped in Spanish moss that swayed like ghostly shrouds in the faint breeze. There was a stillness to it, a heavy silence that was more than just the absence of city noise. It felt watchful. We reached the fork. The left path looked even less traveled than the one we were on. As Alex directed me onto it, I remember my headlights catching something glinting just off the trail, nestled among the ferns. It looked like a small, oddly shaped stone, or maybe a piece of discarded metal, dark and smooth. I didn't think much of it at the time, just a fleeting observation. The cabin, when we finally reached it, was even more run down than Alex had described. It was a single-story log structure sagging in the middle, with a porch that looked ready to collapse if a strong wind blew. Most of the windows were boarded up, and the one that wasn't was a dark, empty square. The surrounding clearing was choked with weeds and thorny bushes. The other guys, Mark and Sam, had arrived earlier in Mark's Jeep and were already attempting to wrestle a rusty old generator to life. "Welcome to paradise," Mark had grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. The plan was to work until dark, then get a fire going, cook some food, and camp out. The cabin itself was deemed uninhabitable for the night. A cursory glance inside revealed cobwebs thick as curtains, dust an inch deep, and the distinct smell of mildew and something else. Something faintly acrid, like old iron. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, an unnerving chill settled over the clearing. It wasn't just the temperature dropping. It was a palpable coldness that seemed to emanate from the woods themselves. I was gathering firewood near the edge of the clearing, the tree line a black, impenetrable wall just a few yards away. The sounds of the forest, the crickets and distant owls I'd heard earlier, had faded into an almost oppressive silence. That's when I first saw it, or thought I saw it. A flicker of movement at the very edge of my vision, deep within the shadows of the trees. I straightened up, peering into the gloom. Nothing, just the dense undergrowth and the black trunks of trees. I shook my head, figuring it was a deer, or maybe just my eyes playing tricks on me in the fading light. But a prickle of unease ran down my spine. It hadn't felt like an animal. It felt deliberate. I carried my armload of wood back to the growing pile near the fire pit Mark and Sam were digging. Alex was still fiddling with the generator, cursing under his breath. "See anything out there?" Mark asked, noticing my expression. "Thought I saw something move." "Probably just a deer," I said, trying to sound casual. Alex finally grunted in triumph as the generator sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life, casting a harsh yellow glare from a single work light he'd strung up. The sudden noise and light felt like a violation of the profound quiet that had settled. We got the fire going, a big crackling blaze that pushed back the encroaching darkness and the chill. We cooked sausages and beans, drank a few beers, though I stuck to soda, being the designated level head if anything went wrong, and shared stories, the usual camping stuff, but I couldn't shake that feeling of being watched. Every so often, I'd glance towards the tree line, half expecting to see eyes staring back. The firelight cast dancing, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and twist just beyond its reach. Later, as the fire died down to glowing embers, Alex brought out the uncle's hand-drawn map again. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a section beyond the cabin. "There are these weird symbols marked all over this part of the property, almost like a warning, or I don't know." He showed us. Small, spidery symbols like twisted stick figures or runes were dotted across a specific area on the map, about half a mile deeper into the woods. "Probably just where he buried his moonshine," Mark joked, but nobody laughed. The symbols were unsettling. It must have been around 1 a.m. when nature called. The others were starting to unroll their sleeping bags near the fire. I told them I was going to walk a little way off. Grabbing my flashlight, I headed towards the edge of the clearing, away from the cabin and the generator's drone. The woods were utterly black beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. The silence was back, thicker than before. I found a suitable spot and, as I was finishing up, I shone my light idly around. The beam swept across the undergrowth, the gnarled tree trunks, and then it landed on something. It was one of those dark, smooth objects I'd glimpsed from the truck earlier, but this one was clearly visible. Not a stone. It was a carving, almost like a small, grotesque totem, made of some dark, polished wood. It was shaped vaguely like an emaciated human figure, but with limbs too long and a head that was disproportionately large, featureless, except for two deeply gouged holes that seemed to absorb the light. It was about a foot tall, stuck into the earth. My blood ran cold. This was no whimsical garden gnome. This was something else. I took a hesitant step closer, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. There were more of them, dotted around, almost forming a loose semicircle, all facing inwards towards where I stood. They were partially hidden by ferns and shadows, but now that I knew what to look for, I could see at least 5 or 6. Each one was subtly different, yet undeniably part of the same disturbing set. A twig snapped behind me. I spun around, heart hammering, shining the flashlight wildly. Nothing. Just the impenetrable darkness. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin and reedy. "Alex? Mark? Is that you?" Silence. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. Then a low whisper, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. It seemed to come from all around, or from nowhere at all. "You shouldn't be here." It wasn't one of my friends' voices. It was dry, raspy, like autumn leaves skittering across pavement. And it was close. Panic seized me. I turned and bolted, stumbling through the undergrowth back towards the flickering firelight and the relative safety of the others. I didn't look back. "What the hell's wrong?" Alex asked, seeing my pale face as I burst back into the clearing. I gasped out what I'd seen, what I'd heard. The totems, the voice. Mark scoffed. "Probably just the wind, man. And those things? Uncle was a weird dude. Maybe he was into some creepy folk art." Sam, however, looked uneasy. "I don't know, Mark. This place, it feels off." Alex, though trying to appear calm, had a worried frown. "Let's just stick together. Nobody wanders off alone." Sleep was impossible. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a branch sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring up at the sliver of moon visible through the canopy, my flashlight clutched in my hand like a talisman. The generator had long since run out of fuel, plunging us back into a more primal darkness, with only the dying embers of the fire for comfort. It was perhaps an hour before dawn, that dead, still time when the night is at its blackest, that it happened. A sound, a soft, rhythmic scraping, coming from the direction of the cabin. Scrape, pause, scrape. We all heard it. We sat bolt upright, exchanging wide-eyed glances. "What is that?" Sam whispered, his voice trembling. Alex grabbed a heavy mag light. "Stay here," he muttered, though he looked terrified. "Like hell," Mark said, grabbing a hatchet we'd been using for firewood. "We go together." Reluctantly, I got up, my legs feeling like lead. We moved slowly, cautiously towards the cabin. The scraping sound continued, steady and deliberate. It seemed to be coming from the side of the cabin, the one with the boarded-up windows. As we rounded the corner, Alex shone his mag light. The sight that greeted us rooted us to the spot. Something, or someone was there. It was tall, unnaturally so, and skeletally thin, its limbs elongated and spindly. It was dark, blending almost perfectly with the shadows, its form vaguely humanoid but distorted, like a reflection in a warped mirror. It was crouched by the cabin wall, and in one of its long, claw-like hands, it held a jagged piece of rock. It was methodically scraping this rock against the wooden planks covering one of the windows, peeling away slivers of wood. Its head turned slowly towards us, and even in the dim light, I could see two pale, glowing orbs where its eyes should have been. They seemed to fix on me. It didn't have a discernible face, more a shadowed, vaguely pointed prow, but I felt an overwhelming sense of ancient, malevolent intelligence. Then it moved, not like a human. It unfolded itself, rising to a height that must have been close to 8 feet, its limbs jointed in a way that was fundamentally wrong. It let out a sound, not a roar, but a chattering, clicking vocalization that vibrated in my bones, like 1,000 insects chirping in unison. We didn't need a second invitation. We screamed, turned, and ran. We scrambled for Mark's Jeep, keys fumbling, terror giving us a desperate, clumsy energy. I remember diving into the back, Alex wrestling with the ignition, Mark yelling. The chattering sound was closer now, and I could hear heavy, thudding footsteps behind us, impossibly fast. The engine caught. Alex slammed it into reverse, tires spinning in the loose dirt, and we fishtailed wildly, the headlights swinging around to illuminate the tree line. For a heart-stopping moment, the figure was there, at the edge of the clearing, its pale eyes burning in the dark, one long arm raised as if in a gesture of farewell or a curse. Then we were careening back down the rutted track, branches whipping against the Jeep, Alex driving like a man possessed. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were our panicked breaths and the straining of the engine. We didn't stop until we hit paved road, and even then, we drove for another hour before pulling into an all-night gas station, the fluorescent lights feeling like a sanctuary. We looked like lunatics, covered in dirt, pale, shaking. We called the sheriff's department from a payphone. We tried to explain what happened, but how do you explain a thing like that? A tall, shadowy creature with glowing eyes scraping at a cabin wall? They listened patiently, probably chalking it up to city boys spooked by the woods, maybe some local hermit or a bear. They promised to send a deputy out to the general area in the morning to check for trespassers, but their tone was dismissive. We never went back for my truck. I reported it stolen, vaguely mentioning it was taken from a remote wooded area. I couldn't bring myself to tell the full story to the insurance company or the police beyond our initial garbled report. Who would believe it? A few weeks later, Alex got a call from the sheriff. They'd found the access road to his uncle's property eventually. There was no sign of my truck. The cabin was there, undisturbed, at least from the outside. They did mention one odd thing. Surrounding the cabin, driven into the ground, were several crude wooden carvings. They'd also found signs of a large animal, they said, maybe a bear, that had clawed at the boarded-up windows. Probably what spooked you boys, the deputy had said, chuckling. But it wasn't a bear. I know what I saw. We all do. The way it moved, those eyes, that chattering sound. And those carvings, they weren't just crude. They were markers, or warnings, or worse, focal points for whatever that thing was. Alex sold the land quickly, at a massive loss to some logging company. He never wanted to set foot near it again. Neither did Mark or Sam. We don't talk about that weekend much. When we do, it's in hushed tones, like speaking its name too loudly might summon it. Sometimes late at night when I'm alone and the house is quiet, I hear it. That faint, dry whisper, "You shouldn't be here." I know it's just my mind playing tricks, the trauma echoing. But then I remember those pale, glowing eyes in the darkness, and the cold dread washes over me again. The scariest part? The uncle's hand-drawn map, those spidery symbols he'd marked in the woods beyond the cabin. We never found out what they meant, but I have a sickening feeling that we weren't the first ones to encounter the guardian of that desolate place, and I wonder if it was confined to that property, or if, disturbed, it might have followed. I keep my doors locked, and I don't like the woods anymore, especially not after dark. I sometimes wonder about those loggers who bought the land. I wonder if they've seen anything, or heard the scraping, or found more of those little dark totems watching them from the shadows. And the question that chills me to the core, the one that surfaces in the darkest hours of the night. What was it trying to get into by scraping at those boarded up windows? Or more terrifyingly, what was it trying to make sure stayed out? Or perhaps what was inside that cabin that it was protecting or communing with? I'll never know. And frankly, I don't want to. Some doors are best left unopened, some woods best left unexplored.